So this next topic is going to finish up our big tour of the somatosensory system, which is actually all those sensory systems that are tied directly to our body state. So in this first video, we're going to talk about proprioception, and in the next video, we'll talk about the vestibular system, and then a final video about what's called sensory adaptation. So remember, somatosensation includes all sorts of bodily senses. We talked about the touch mechanoreceptors, there are 4 of those. We talked about nociceptors for pain, thermoceptors for temperature, and interoceptors for our insides and our guts. But I kind of skipped over those last 2 there, proprioception and the sense of balance or motion, sometimes called equilibrioception. And those, as we'll see, are closely tied to the vestibular system. So that's what we'll be talking about. We're coming back to those. So let's start with proprioception in this video. What is proprioception? It is your sense of the position and extension of your body and your limbs within 3-dimensional space. That means things like your posture, like how your body is currently oriented, current muscle tension and the length of your muscles, tracking your finger movements on like a piano or a violin, locating where in space a touch just happened, and things like that. It also lets you track, where your arm is as you reach out to grab something, especially since vision might only give some vague information when you're reaching out in your periphery, or maybe none at all if you're not looking where you reach, or if it's dark or something like that. Now, as with our other somatosensory systems, we've got these specialized sensory receptors that actually pick up this information and send it to the brain. In this case, the proprioception system has 3 types of receptors. They're all technically mechanoreceptors, just meaning they work for mechanical action, mechanical stimulation, like being physically stretched or pulled to make the neuron fire, kind of similar to those mechanoreceptors we saw for touch in our skin. The 3 types for proprioception, the 3 types of receptors are, first off, muscle spindles. These detect changes in muscle stretch. So in other words, the length of the muscle. There's Golgi tendon organs. These detect changes in muscle tension, like whether you're carrying a really heavy load when you try to bring in all 12 grocery bags at once like a badass, or carrying a light load whereas there's a single bag without much in it, right? And then there's joint receptors, are the 3rd type. They are receptors in the skin around our joints that detect when the skin stretches from joint changes. So basically, like when we move our leg, for example, say to raise our foot up off the ground, the brain is getting some feedback telling us if it worked and how far our leg is lifted off the ground. So imagine you're in the dark, or maybe you're blind, or you have your eyes closed. That means you couldn't get visual feedback to see how far your foot is off the ground. So how do you tell? Well, through feedback from those proprioceptors, in other words, the sensory receptors for proprioception that we just talked about. And those are located around various muscles and tendons and joints. So you might have a whole bunch of those in different places that are giving some information. And that gets combined maybe with some Ruffini endings, some like of those cutaneous receptors, I mean those skin receptors that we talked about before, the familiar mechanoreceptors for touch that detect things like the skin itself, stretching during the stretch. So it's kind of a combined, all that info together, proprioceptive info, and maybe also some general skin touch information that helps tell the body, or tell the brain where the body is or how much that posture has changed. So here's what these 3 mechanoreceptors actually look like. You can see at the top left here, we've got the muscle spindles. These neurons kind of in blue here wrapped around that send a signal if the muscle is stretched. So if it lengthens. Remember, afferent with an A, that means sensory signals going to the brain. So those are the actual signals. Those are the detectors. They're sending the signal off to the brain. The efferent wires here with an E are the opposite. Those are the motor signals. Those are coming back down from the brain to control the muscle. Meanwhile, the Golgi tendon organs, those are similar, but they're located at the tendons where they meet the muscle. So you can kind of see at the very bottom here, the tendon as it meets the muscle, or you can see in the bottom right here, you've got the tendon as it meets the muscle. This is the Golgi tendon organ. It's these, again, afferent nerve fibers, meaning it's neurons. It's a bunch of neurons that send a signal up to the brain from there. So we've got these little receptors hooked on at the tendon to track how much tension there is at any given time. And finally, if you kind of zoom in at the joints themselves, right, there's these little receptors around there that they get activated during skin stretch. Technically, it's the skin being stretched that pulls on them and makes them fire. Now, here in the upper right, you can see actual neural activity. Like if we're looking at the firing rate of, say, a muscle spindle or a Golgi tendon organ. So for example, on the left half of this diagram here, imagine a muscle being stretched with some force. That means the muscle gets longer. So we can see from the orange line here, the muscle length goes up. They start stretching here, and that increases the firing rate of that muscle spindle. On the right half of the diagram, imagine a muscle being contracted with some force, and you see that the Golgi tendon organ, right, when the muscle force happens, the Golgi tendon organ's firing rate increases. So they detect, length, tension of the muscles, and then again, the joint receptors also fill in some info. Now, finally, a side note from that earlier diagram I showed. Notice the kind of thought bubble up top there mentioning central signals. In other words, brain signals, right? Central meaning central nervous system. So this can also be a source of info to the brain to help it judge how far your leg is lifted off the ground when, say, you don't have visual confirmation. Think of it this way. When your brain sends that motor signal out to activate those muscles, says, lift my leg, right? When it sends that command out, turns out it also sends a copy of that signal to other parts of your brain to tell the rest of your brain, hey, I just told this leg to lift this much, so expect to find out about that from the sensory systems in a moment. And it's actually what we call an efference copy, so with an E, or an efference copy if you like. It's a copy of that efferent signal. Normally, we not only get proprioception input a moment later telling the brain how successful the movement was, but normally we'd also see visually how high our leg went, right? Not to mention if we're standing up, we might get some balance feedback too. Well, all of that info that comes in and tells the brain from the sensory systems how well the movement worked, that actually gets compared in the brain to that efference copy that was sent out that had built sort of expectations of how much we expect the muscles to move when we send out that motor signal. And that helps the brain calibrate its motor signals to learn over years of experience, especially when we're first a baby, first learning how our body works, or as your body changes over time, you have to learn from experience how big of a motor signal to send out to move my leg now that it weighs more than it did when I was a toddler, right? But the brain can kind of calibrate those signals to figure out what signals lead to what movement. So proprioception it's a big part of that combined process that helps us correlate our motor actions with the feedback we get from other senses like vision as well. There's actually a tight link between perception and action, between sensory systems and motor systems. There were studies back in the early 2000s, for example, that showed that you're more accurate at predicting a dart's landing position, like will it hit the target or not, when you're watching a video of a throw. So this is a visual judgment, but you're more accurate when watching a video of a throw that was previously made by yourself rather than watching a video of a throw made by someone else where you don't have that proprioceptive information from back when you made the throw. And proprioception is obviously pretty important functionally in our day-to-day experience, even though it gets so neglected when people list off the usual 5 senses of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Here's just a short fun video example from a Japanese game show, just for a quick laugh. But think about the proprioceptive element to the task they're doing here.
さあ、自分のポジション考えてください。自分で体を大きく考えて、身長218センチ、文字本番文字を文字のクリア。来い来い来い。よし。なんで？あ、できるよ。できますよ。走り幅跳びのイメージですよ。走り幅跳びのイメージですよ。どうぞ。もう何が出るか分かっていて3人がスタンバイしています。泣きの1回団体戦芸人チームの挑戦。逆転。これいけるか。足広げろよ。でかいところ。さあ炎。はい
So obviously vision in that one helps you get an idea for the target where you need to put your body, but proprioception gives you a feeling for whether you're in the right place, like how much you've moved it. I don't know, that's just a funny example. But of course, proprioception is used all the time to guide not just those big gross motor actions of our body where our limbs are in general, but it's also really important for guiding fine motor action, fine motor control, like smaller movements, movements of your fingers, things like that. So someone being able to play guitar or violin or something like that without looking directly at the strings, that requires a well-functioning and well-trained proprioception system. So quick example here. So yeah, being able to make all those actions, especially if you're looking away briefly or blinking or whatever, you can still do it because proprioception helps you know where your fingers are relative to, where you expect them to be. And of course, tactile information is also involved there. Now, this shows a patient actually who has damage to her proprioception system, and you can see she has trouble touching her nose or touching a target out in front of her without vision to guide her movements. If you take the blindfold off, she does just fine on that task. Now, if you want to experience proprioception at home with a pretty easy demonstration, what you can do for the first step of this one, just close your eyes and raise both hands over your head with palms out. Then for the second step, keep your eyes closed, and with your index finger on one of those hands, quickly touch your nose and then touch the thumb of your opposite hand while it's still up there. Try to go straight to the thumb. Don't fumble around. Don't feel it out. Just try and tap it directly without missing. There's a good chance, at least for one or two of those tries, you're going to miss. And you can repeat it a few times. Maybe try to go straight from touching your nose to tapping the tip of a specific finger. Like this time I'm going to aim for my ring finger or something like that. Again, while not moving that other hand, just move your targeting hand, okay? Try using your dominant hand. Maybe try the same thing, but switch to your non-dominant hand. See if you do better or worse. Try it with the target hand held maybe at a more normal location you have more experience with. So just your hand, resting gently in front of you instead of holding it way up above your head. You might find that those things make a difference, as does, of course, practice and feedback. So even if you leave your hand above your head, if you just do this over and over and over again, you will, of course, get better. Now, another fun way to experience the spatial limitations of proprioception requires a friend or a partner to help out. And then you'll need a couple of washable markers, and optionally something like a ruler to measure with would be nice. So what you do for this one is you and your partner should each grab a different color marker. You're going to take turns trying the experiment. So one person will just serve as the participant for the whole experiment, and then if you want, you can switch and the other person can do it. And what you do as a participant, you'll close your eyes the whole time for this. You may need to roll back your sleeve if you have long sleeves on, because you want to leave your arm and your hand kind of out there open so that we can actually make some marker marks on them if you're okay with that. That's why I say washable marker. So you'll kind of extend your arm out resting on the table so that the underside of your forearm is face up and your hand is resting palm up on the table. So just getting a nice relaxed posture so you can do this for, a few minutes. Your partner then, for each of the trials, each of the attempts they do, your partner is then going to briefly touch you with the tip of their marker somewhere on your fingers, say, or for a different condition, we might do somewhere on the underside of your forearm. Now you've got to keep your eyes closed for the whole experiment. So don't look, even between trial, don't look, or you could do, you could look afterwards on each trial if you really want to, just to kind of see, but either way will work. But keep your eyes closed. And then what you do is after your partner just briefly touches you with the tip of their pen, they're going to make a little mark with their color of marker. Let's say they have a red one. They'll make a little red dot, say on the, halfway down your middle finger, right? So they make a little red dot halfway down your middle finger. And then what you have to do is with your eyes closed, you have to bring in the marker that you're holding with your other hand. You have to bring it in with your eyes closed. Try and touch the tip of your marker right to that spot where they just put the mark on you. So let's say you have a blue marker. You want your blue dot to be as close to that red dot as possible. But don't feel around with your fingers as a guide. Don't cheat here. Just try to directly and immediately touch the tip of your marker directly on that spot and then immediately pull it up. In other words, just make a little dot, hopefully close to their dot. And you do this a bunch of times, as many as you want to, but after each trial, what you might do is measure and record the error. That's why I say it's nice if you have a ruler for this, just to keep track of which body part you're testing. You might write down finger on one side of a data sheet, right, a piece of paper, and forearm on the other side to kind of get a feel. If you do maybe 5 or 10 finger trials and 5 or 10 forearm trials, see if you're more accurate for one of those or the other. And of course, if you don't have a ruler and don't want to measure this out directly, you can always just peek after each trial, look at it and see how far off your dot was. And you and your partner or your friend might have a little giggle if you're, pretty far off sometimes. And of course, if you're comfortable doing so with a partner, you could also try other locations like on your leg or even on your belly. Though be careful not to stain any clothes. Even with a washable marker, you want to be careful not to hit clothes. But try it out, collect some data, and then think about why you might be better on some parts of your body and not others. If you want to be more systematic about this, you could even try doing it and collecting data with, say, your arm resting directly in front of you versus angling it so that your arm crosses the midline of your body, or trying it at various heights, and see what kind of variables affect your performance here. Now, for a similar demo that you can do all by yourself, if you don't have a friend or partner, you don't have washable markers, you can actually just grab a piece of paper, hold a piece of paper against the tabletop with one of your hands, and then the other hand hold a pen or a marker. And what you might do is draw a little circle or an X on the paper to serve as a target. Then keep holding the paper there, but raise your pen hand up above your head and with your eyes closed. So close your eyes for this, then try to make a dot on the paper as close to the target as possible. And you can open your eyes and see how you did. Maybe do it a few times with targets, could be closer to or further from the hand that's holding the paper. Try it with your dominant or your non-dominant hand holding the pen. Either way, this one will probably be a little easier than that partner activity I just mentioned, because you will have just had your pen hand in the same location a moment earlier when drawing that target, so it is easier to return back to that spot a moment later. Another solo demo you can do if you don't have a partner to find the limits of your proprioceptive accuracy is to sit on the edge of your couch or your chair, okay? Remove your shoes and socks so your feet are bare and just sitting there flat on the floor. Then close your eyes and try to reach down from a full sitting up position. Try to now, with your eyes closed, reach down and then touch a specific toe on your left or your right foot without looking and without correcting. Try to just make direct contact with your initial touch on the toe you intended with no feedback or adjustments. It's actually pretty common with this for people to miss even a few times before their brain quickly starts to learn from the feedback and become a little more accurate for later attempts. Now, in the lab, there are a lot of different ways we measure proprioception accuracy. So one example is we might put a participant's arm on sort of a platform or a paddle like this, and then either have them try to match one arm's angle to the other arm's angle while they're totally blindfolded, so they can't see if they're at the same angle, but see how close they can do it from feeling alone, and just record the angle of the error, so the angle of how far off they are when they try to match those up. Or the other way we do this might be to have their arm off to one side, so it's out of view, and you put it at a certain angle, so you, the experimenter, adjust that reference angle, and then they, on the side they can see, they have to set a pointer basically to the same angle. And this is just, there are many ways to test proprioception, but this is one example we do in a lab. And actually, back in some early research on proprioception, back in the 70s, Goodwin and colleagues documented some pretty interesting illusions using methods like this. So specifically, they found that if you vibrate a muscle tendon, so it's a way of kind of activating the neurons that are underneath there without having to inject and put an electrode under the skin or do any sort of surgery. You can actually just apply a vibration. If it's a strong enough vibration at roughly the right frequency, apply that to a muscle tendon, and that will activate the muscle spindles there, which means it then sends a signal of muscle movement to the primary somatosensory cortex, to S1, which means it'll feel like your arm is bending even when it's not. You can see one example here where there's a comparison arm basically that wasn't vibrated, and the participant's blindfolded the whole time, but the comparison arm wasn't vibrated, and then the one that was vibrated, this normal person wearing a blindfold has to, by their own feeling, try and match up their arms at the same angle, and you can see how far off they were after vibrating the tendon on one of those arms. They feel like their arms are at the same angle even when they're this far apart, which of course normally people are much more accurate if you haven't just induced an illusion like this with the vibrations. Now, depending on which muscle tendons you vibrate, like whether you do biceps versus triceps, you can get a feeling of extension or a feeling of contraction, of flexion or extension. So you can get kind of different illusory movement here. And again, of course, it works best if you're blindfolded, so your vision can't overrule it and be like, oh no, I'm not moving at all, right? If all you've got is the feeling of proprioception to go on, we're just sending that signal to the brain, telling it that your arm has moved even when it actually hasn't. But that means you can make someone perceive movement that is anatomically impossible. So for example, if their upper arm is fully extended and maybe it's supported only under the upper arm there, if you vibrate the biceps tendon, it'll feel like the elbow is hyperextended, like your arm is bending back in a way that it can't normally bend, which makes for a weird feeling. So it's an interesting proprioceptive illusion. One research group even used vibrations like this to stimulate the proprioceptive system in a way that causes an illusion they called the shrinking waist illusion. Basically, they had participants hold their hands on their hips, and then you vibrate those tendons, like we talked about before, to make it feel either like the arms have bowed outwards or like they've moved inwards, even though the actual hands are literally physically in the same place as always, right there on the normal hips. But since your touch sensation, your touch senses on your hands and on your hips, that tells you the hand is still there the whole time on your hips. But we've tricked the proprioception sensors in your arms into feeling like your arms have moved the hands inward in space or moved the hands outward in space. The only way the brain can make sense of that is if your waist has gotten smaller, if your waist is shrinking, or for the other version, if your waist has expanded and gotten bigger. And that's exactly what participants report when you do this. Again, you have them blindfolded while you do this. A similar idea actually shows up in this well-documented, what's called the Pinocchio illusion, named after the character with the nose that grows longer when he lies. So for this one, you have a participant close their eyes or blindfold them, then they touch their nose with their hand, right? So they're just holding their hand to their nose, holding their fingers up to their nose, feeling it. So their fingers and their nose both feel the touch, right? The nose feels it's being touched, the fingers feel they're touching something. Clearly your fingers are touching your nose. Then what we do is we vibrate the biceps, which will make it feel like the arm has extended, and thus like the hand is much further out in front of the face. So it feels like the arm has moved and like you've kind of pushed the arm away, pushed the hand away from the face. But the touch information still going into the primary somatosensory cortex from those touches. The touch information makes it clear my hand is still touching my nose, even though the hand feels like it's way out in front of my face now. So the brain's conclusion is to make me perceive that my nose is growing. It suddenly feels a foot long. We would sometimes call this proprioceptive capture of touch, meaning the felt touch is it's experienced as happening where proprioception tells us it's happening, out there a foot in front of our face. So proprioception is kind of capturing, taking over, ruling the sense of touch. You can actually do the same thing if you instead put your hand on top of your head and then vibrate the right tendon. You can feel like your head is way taller than it actually is. So similar idea to that shrinking waist illusion. Now, some of you may have vibration devices at home. Many won't, or maybe not powerful enough vibrators for a strong version of these illusions. But if you want, you can still experience the Pinocchio illusion at home. So if you don't have a partner who you're comfortable touching, then the vibrator may be necessary. But what you would do for this version, if you do have a partner who's comfortable with you touching them, what you do for this version is have your partner sit in front of you in a chair while you're sitting in a chair right behind them. Now you'll close your eyes the whole time, or wear a blindfold if you want, and with one hand you're going to touch your own nose, and with the other hand you're going to reach around and touch their nose. Make sure they consent to this, obviously. Then what you do is stroke yourself and stroke them at the same time. Like move your fingertips lightly downward on your nose and on their nose in a synchronized matching way. Tap the left side of your nose and the left side of their nose in the same way at the exact same time. Maybe circle the tip of both noses synchronously, or stroke upward at the same time, and so on. Do that synchronous stroking for a minute or so, and many people will report this strong sensation that their nose appendage is growing, and it may soon feel like the appendage is 2 feet long. That's a Pinocchio illusion. And then, of course, you can switch positions and let your partner try it. Now, another fun proprioception demo you can do with a partner requires just a little bit of flexibility. What you do is outstretch your arms and cross the hands over to opposite sides before intertwining your fingers together, like you're holding your own hands, kind of like in the picture here. Once you've done that, then, without letting go, so keep your hands clasped, but without letting go, lower those clasp hands down and twist them back up in front of you, so you can now kind of look down at your fingers from above. And they're still clasped together, okay? Now, for this demo, your friend is just gonna randomly point to one of your 10 fingers, right? Your fingers or your thumbs, gonna point to one of those fingers at random. And your goal is, as quick as possible, don't overthink it, don't like try them all out, but just as quick as possible, try to lift that finger that they pointed to up and not a different finger. Try it a few different times, try it for a few different fingers. Most people make some mistakes, especially for the first few trials, and lift a finger on the wrong side. And that's because your brain is not used to your arms being in this reversed position. So when your friend points to a finger that's on the side of space where your brain expects a right hand finger to be, it'll lift a right hand finger, even though that's actually the left finger that's on that side due to that twisting that we did. Finally, I just want to show you one last proprioceptive illusion from a perception conference a few years back. So let me play this quick video you can see.
To experience this illusion, all you need is a semispherical shell. You could use, for instance, half a ping pong ball. When you lift the shell up from the table, it immediately looks like a complete ball. Although you know it's just an empty shell, it still looks like a complete ball. What happens if you put your finger inside the shell while it looks like a ball? Try it out for yourself. Look at your extended fingers directly from above. Balance the shell on your middle finger. Does it look like a complete ball? Is the tip of your middle finger closer or further away than your other 2 fingertips? Where do you feel that the tip of your middle finger is located? Most people will feel that their middle finger is further away, but of course it is closer. Thus, the finger feels like it has become shorter than it usually is, as if to make space for the illusory volume of the ball.
So that's an example of an interaction between vision and touch, right? Visually looking at the ball, vision and proprioception. So touch is in there knowing you're touching it, but vision and proprioception are what really are interacting here. So if you want to try this one at home, just find a ping pong ball, like go to the store, wherever they sell beer, there's usually ping pong balls near the beer, I don't know why, and just cut a ping pong ball in half. Or even just cut enough of the bottom off that you can stick a finger up into the ping pong ball, okay? You'll find when you look directly down at the ping pong ball from directly above, it'll look like it's complete. It'll look like it's a complete sphere. And if you did that right, then it'll also probably feel like your middle finger is shorter than usual. And this is an example of what we'd call the visual capture of proprioception. So earlier I talked about proprioception capturing another sense. This is an example where vision captures proprioception. In this case, your brain kind of trusts your visual input over the proprioception that it's feeling. It assumes that the ball is whole, and vision says the top of the ball is this far from your eyes, so the bottom of the ball must be that far from our eyes, right? And since touch tells you the ball is resting on your fingertips, and usually balls are whole, visually it looks like a whole sphere, a whole ball, then your brain is going to conclude that the touch is occurring further away in space, further from your eyes than it actually is, which overrides the true proprioceptive signal and gives that weird feeling that your middle finger is suddenly shorter than usual. At any rate, that's enough demos to experience the basics of proprioception. So we'll end this video here. In the next video, we're going to move on to yet another sensory system, still part of the somatosensory system, the combined stuff. But this next one will be the vestibular system. It'll be one of the main ones contributing to our sense of balance.